God's grace. If a human being can become a sarvajna by God's grace, then what to talk of Bhagavan himself being sarvajna? You see? In order to help a poor person, the one who helps is naturally is a rich person. The one who can make you rich definitely is a rich person. Similarly, by whose grace, by whose grace, a yogi can become sarvajna, he can come to know a lot of things, then definitely Ishvara is also sarvajna. And the knowledge of Ishvara is not something, that begins in time. Knowledge is eternal. Knowledge has no negation because it is the knowledge that has to illumine even the negation of something that gets negated. Knowledge. We don't have variety of knowledge. Knowledge is only one. That knowledge is the nature of Brahman, and that knowledge is eternal. Only in relation to a form, it looks as though knowledge of. See, knowledge of the tree, knowledge of pot, knowledge of mat, knowledge of a tree, knowledge of a river, knowledge of a flower. The objects of knowledge are many and varied. But knowledge itself cannot be qualified. This is what is to be discovered in life. Knowledge cannot be qualified. Objects of knowledge are qualified. Objects of knowledge are many, countless, and varied. But knowledge itself is unqualified. Knowledge of a red flower is not red. That knowledge is not red. See, that knowledge is not red. The knowledge of a green flower is not green. Flower is green, but that knowledge of the green flower is not green. The knowledge of something tall is not tall. The knowledge of something short is not short. The knowledge of something that changes doesn't change. The knowledge of something that gets negated doesn't get negated. Thus, it is very much within our experience. It's very much evident that knowledge is unqualified. It has no form, it has no sound, taste, touch, smell, it has no dimension, it has no beginning, it has no end. Knowledge. And that knowledge equated with the body looks like a human being. This human being is none other than the unqualified knowledge. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. The unqualified knowledge, assuming the form of the body, looks like a human being. Looks like a jiva. Otherwise, in experience, it is absolutely clear that knowledge has no qualification. See? It's a very nice, very interesting, very important thing. The knowledge of a color has no color. The knowledge of a sound has no sound. The knowledge of taste has no taste. The knowledge of taste has no taste. The knowledge of touch has no touch. The knowledge of smell has no smell. The knowledge about the dream is not a dream, it is a truth. The knowledge of a dream is not a dream. The knowledge of the negation of the dream has no negation. Thus, we are by nature knowledge. We are by nature knowledge. I know, I know, I know, I know. When we say it is knowledge. So here Bhagavan says, this knowledge is the nature of God. This knowledge is the nature of man. In fact, this knowledge as unlimited is called Bhagavan. This knowledge which is unlimited as it is called Bhagavan. The same knowledge, mistakenly judged, the same knowledge is judged as a form. I am the form. I is the knowledge. I is the knowledge, but judged as a form becomes Mr. So-and-so. And therefore, we can't treat thought as knowledge. Thought is not knowledge. Thought comes and goes. Whereas knowledge doesn't come and go. When thought comes, there is knowledge that the thought has come. When the thought goes, there is knowledge that the thought has gone. That knowledge doesn't come and go. When the pleasure begins, there is knowledge. When the pleasure ends, there is knowledge. You can't say there is no knowledge. When the pain begins, there is knowledge. When the pain ends, again there is knowledge. So there was the pain came yesterday and the pain has gone today. So the one who is aware of the beginning and end of pain doesn't begin, doesn't end. So the eternity of knowledge is evident to everybody. Eternity is not something, unknown, unexperienced, unevident. What is constantly being experienced by man is the eternity of himself. He is not experiencing anything else. He is experiencing himself as eternal. Thus, he is knowledge eternal. And that is Parameshwara. It is not other than Parameshwara. Therefore, yat prasadadhniyoginam vyatitan anagata vishayam pratyaksham jnanam icchanti yoga shastra vidaha kim vaktavyam tasya nitya siddhasya ishwarasya srishti siddhi samriti vishayam nitya jnanam bhavati iti. Then yadapi uktam pragutpattehe brahmanaha shariradi sambandhamantarena ikshitritvam anupannamiti. This is the question now. The Purva Pakshi said that in order to know the name and form, in order to be aware of the name and form, you have to have the senses, he said. Like, we need senses. I can't see the name and I can't see the form without eyes. I can't hear the sound without ears. So without the senses, I can't be aware of the objects. Similarly, Bhagavan also, before creation, he didn't have the body. Because body is a part of creation, senses are a part of creation, mind is a part of creation, time is a part of creation. And before the creation, he didn't have the body, senses and the mind. Then how did he came to know the unmanifest name and form? In order to make the unmanifest manifest, then he has to see the unmanifest. He has to see the name and form and then create. Then how did Bhagavan see that? How did he think Before he thought and created the world. He saw the unmanifest name and form and made them manifest. Okay. In order to make the unmanifest name and form manifest, then he must have the senses. But the senses cannot be there before creation. So how can he become aware of the name and form before the creation? This is the Purva-paksha. This is the objection. Says, Yadapi Uktam, what was the objection that was put up by the Purva-pakshi? Pragutpattehe, before creation, Brahmanaha Sharirad Sambandhamantarena, without having a body, without senses, without mind, the Brahman, Yikshitritvam Anupapannamiti, he cannot be a seer. You say God saw and created, then how did he see? Without senses. How did he see without a mind? How did he see? For that the answer is, Na tat chodyam avatarati. This question doesn't arise. Meaning this question has no place. Chodyam means a question. Na avatarati means it doesn't arise. This question itself doesn't arise because seeing doesn't depend upon senses. We judge in ignorance that seeing means being aware. Seeing means being aware. That being aware, that awareness does not depend upon the senses. Now, in ignorance, we think that awareness depends upon the senses. That is why we conclude that when there are no senses, I have lost awareness. This is the problem. When I lose my eyes, I lose awareness, sight. When I lose the five senses, I lose awareness. I lose mind, I lose awareness. When I lose my mind, then I am not aware. And I am not aware. When I fall asleep, then I am not aware. When I die, then I am not aware. This is a wrong conclusion about awareness. Not that awareness depends upon the sense organs. Awareness is there. When senses are there, there is awareness. When the senses are not there, when the senses are there, one is aware. When the senses are not there, one is aware. You are aware. You can't say you are not aware. Maybe there is no object of awareness, but you are aware. And this is what is to be looked at in one's life. So, Bhagavan, it is the nature of knowledge, it is the nature of God, it is the nature of the self to be aware, independent of the senses. When the senses are, one is aware. When the senses are not, also one is aware. It's like when I have glasses, I have eyes. When I have glasses, I have eyes. When I have no glasses also, I have eyes. The sight does not depend upon the glasses. Similarly, the sight does not depend upon eyes. This is what Vedanta is saying, The sight does not depend upon the eyes. The sight means awareness. So when one has eyes, one is aware of the forms through the eyes, or one is aware of the forms. When one loses the senses, like in the dream, I leave the senses here. The waking senses we don't carry to the dream. The waking senses we don't carry to the dream. That thing must be looked at. The waking senses we don't carry to the dream. Just as we don't carry the waking body to the dream. Similarly, we don't carry the waking senses to the dream. But there again I see the form, I see the sound, taste, I am aware of. So if awareness were something that is synonymous with the senses, if awareness were synonymous with the waking senses, then when the waking senses are not there, then there should be no awareness. There should be no dream. Really, there should be no dream. Why? Even within the waking state, if one is really very, very strictly logical, if we are very correct, memory would be impossible. If awareness were conditional to the senses, then there should be awareness. When the eyes are there, awareness is there. Ears are functioning. That means, if you say awareness is synonymous with the waking senses, it amounts to saying the existence of awareness is synonymous with the functioning of the senses. Because, senses are nothing but functioning anyway. So, if awareness were synonymous with the senses functioning, then when they are not functioning, there should be no awareness. Therefore, I can't really, with eyes closed, I can't remember a form. With eyes closed, when I close my eyes, there should be no awareness really. Even in the waking. Therefore, we can't categorically say and then they feel that I have done everything, that I have really reached the final reality. One can't say awareness is synonymous with senses. When senses are, awareness is. When senses are not there, there is no awareness. When thought is, awareness is. When thought is gone, awareness is gone. Jiva lives in that conclusion. That is his abode. That is called avidya. The individual lives within that conclusion. He doesn't live in any realm really. He lives in his conclusion, because within that conclusion he is there, the universe also really. Jiva is not living in some realm of universe. In fact, he is living, that attention is confined to that particular conclusion that senses are. I am there, the senses are. There is that I am aware when the senses are not. I am not aware when thought is. I am aware when thought is not. I am not aware. And when I am aware, I am. When I am not aware, I am not. When I am aware, I am. When I am not aware, I am not. Therefore, ultimately, my destiny is not to be. So this is the conclusion. Here Bhashyakara is saying knowledge is eternal. Knowledge does not depend upon senses. Knowledge does not depend upon thought. Because when I don't have the waking senses, there is still knowledge of the dream. Knowledge has no negation. When there is no waking and dream also, there is still knowledge of freedom from both. That is not absence of knowledge, what we call annihilation of everything, total annihilation of the waking and the dream and thought, what we call the great blackout. We call the death really in terms of negation of thought. That is called death. When I have no senses and no memory, then it is called death or deep sleep. Now, that is also not really negation of knowledge, because that is also an experience involving no thought, no object. It is being without thought. It is being without thought, not even really entertaining a thought pertaining to absence of thought. You can't entertain a thought pertaining to the absence of thought. You can be without thought. It is being without thought. Free, absolute, that is deep sleep state is freedom from thought. Freedom from thought in general. That is also in the form of knowledge, which is not in the form of a thought. It is knowledge. It is one's own experience. Thus here Bhashyakara is saying that even before creation, the source of the creation can see, because to see doesn't depend upon, seeing does not depend upon senses and thought. That the seeing depends upon the senses is the error about seeing. That the sight depends upon the senses and thought is the error about the sight, not the actuality of the sight. The actuality of the sight is that it is independent of the senses and the thought. And that it is synonymous with, or that it depends upon the senses and the thought, is the error about the sight. The sight is awareness, that is Brahman. Nahi drashtuhu drishtehe vipariloko vidyate avinashitva. The sight of the seer has no negation because it is eternal. The sight of the seer has no negation, avinashitvat. Therefore, here the Purva-Pakshi's objection that how did God see before creation, because he didn't have the body, because any body, whether it is man's body or God's body, is a part of creation. Thought is a part of creation, senses are a part of creation, and before creation there was no body, no thought. How did God see? In answer to that, Bhagavan says here, Nahi tat chodyam avatarati. This question doesn't arise. Why? Because you are restating your view, the universal view, the error about the sight. You are restating you are only restating the universal view about the sight. Whereas Shastra is stating the sight as it is. The nature of the sight is that it is not conditional to any senses. And then here he says, Natat chodyam avatarati savitri prakashavat, like the sunlight. Savitri prakashavat. Brahmanaha, Brahmaka, Jnana Swarupa Nityatve. It's being aware, being eternal. Brahma is aware and its status of being aware is eternal. The subject's fundamental status of being aware is eternal. If the subject doesn't have the unnegatable status of being aware, it cannot be called even subject. Because the subject is the subject not only of the thought, the subject is a subject of even the negation of thought. Therefore, the subject of the three states doesn't lose his sight, and therefore that is Nityam. Brahma's status of being aware is eternal, and therefore Nityatve. The sight of Brahman being eternal, Jnana sadhana apeksha anupapattehe. Knowledge does not depend upon a means. Jnana sadhana apeksha anupapattehe. It is untenable that it should depend upon a means. The eternal can't depend upon a means. The eternal cannot be, the eternal's existence does not depend upon a means. The eternal's existence does not depend upon a cause. It should not have any crutches. You can't say it is eternal and depends upon the means. It is eternal and it depends upon a cause. It is eternal and it depends upon senses. Is untenable. And therefore God saw. When we say the sight of God is something that is ununderstood, sight as such is understood by Jiva. When Jiva thinks of sight, his definition of sight is the sight that is conditional to the senses and the thought. The same sight which is mistaken to be conditional to the senses, the same sight that is mistaken, that is universally concluded to be conditional to thought, the same sight that is seen as synonymous with the senses and the thought and the memory is in fact eternal, ununderstood by the Jiva. Keeping in view the actuality of that sight ununderstood by the Jiva, the Shruti says God saw. God saw. So one's sight is not understood by oneself. It's not that we don't understand God's sight because sight is only one. There can't be two sights. There's only one sight. I don't understand. I won't say, what is this sight of mine? Because my sight is me anyway. Otherwise, where is this me? My sight is me. I'm aware is me. This is my sight. My drishti is me. This sight of oneself is taken to be non-eternal. Therefore, I am eternal. My sight is non-eternal. Therefore, I am non-eternal. That is exactly what is called the avidya, means the distortion about oneself. Distorted view about oneself means a distorted view about one's sight. Distorted view about the sight which is one's nature. And the one's own sight is ununderstood by oneself, because that I am aware is one's sight, dream is one's sight, even blackout is one's sight, because blackout also is not a belief. Blackout is a sight because we don't experience a belief. We only experience a sight. Because even you believe something, that belief becomes one's sight. I am aware of a belief. That is a sight. I believe boils down to sight. I don't believe boils down to a sight. You see, I know boils down to sight. I don't know also boils down to sight. I don't know means I don't understand what I am seeing. That is called I don't know. But you cannot come across a situation of I am not aware. I can say I don't understand the blackout that I experience. Like I don't understand this world that I see. I don't understand the dream that I see. Similarly, I don't understand the deep sleep which I see. This total blackout which I experience, I don't understand what is it. What is the relation between the waking that I see and myself? What is the relation between the dream and myself? What is this blackout that I see? Thus, I don't know, I don't understand. I don't understand, quote unquote, is a different situation from I am not aware. There can never be a not aware. There can be a dichotomy, there can be two situations like this I understand, this I don't understand. This object that I am aware, this object that I am aware, I understand or I don't understand. But there is no such thing, the object that I am aware or the object I am not aware is this state of awareness, this state of non-awareness. There are no two states of being aware and non-aware. There can be two states of understanding what one is aware of or not understanding what one is aware of. So, this waking world I don't understand, but I am aware. That I am aware cannot be denied. That I am aware of the dream can't be denied. That I am aware of the total blackout. That is also not a belief. Because one can compare, this waking state and the previous waking state, in between what? No waking state. How can you say that it is not one's experience? How can you say thought is my experience, thought is my next thought, first thought is my experience and the next thought is my experience, and in between two thoughts there is no experience, you can't say. In fact, there is experience that there is no thought. Thought is experience, thought I am aware of, next thought I am aware of, in between gap also I am aware of. In this manner, one's sight has no negation. And the unnegatable sight is, assuming a form looks like a man. The eternal sight, the truth, equated with a form, looks like a man. And even there he stands as a sight. I am aware. He says I am a form, but yet he stands as I am aware. He stands as a sight only. Therefore, here he says, well, the self can see, God can see even before creation. That is why he says, Nat tacchodyamavadarati savitri prakashavat, like even the sunlight, brahmanaha jnana swarupa nityatve jnana sadhana apeksha anupapattehe. The synopsis is, knowledge does not depend upon a means. Knowledge doesn't depend upon a means. Swamiji, why not knowledge of an object depends upon a means? Knowledge of an object in this manner, you can't qualify knowledge. When you say knowledge of a pot, when we say, you are not qualifying knowledge. The illuminer of the pot, the sunlight that illumines the pot, doesn't get qualified by the pot. In my thinking, I may imagine, I may think that the sunlight is qualified by what it illumines. That is how one thinks. That may be one's error. But in actuality, the sunlight is not qualified by the pot that it illumines. Therefore, the illuminer of the pot or the illuminer of the mat, the sunlight that illumines the pot doesn't become really, doesn't take upon itself the quality of the pot. The sunlight that illumines clean water doesn't become clean. The sunlight that illumines unclean water doesn't become unclean. In fact, it is not qualified. It's not qualified. In that manner, the sight of the form is not qualified by the form. The sight of the sound, even hearing is a sight, awareness. The sight of the sound is not qualified by the sound. The sight of the taste is not qualified by the taste, touch, smell. Thus, the sight of the universe is not qualified by the universe. The sight of the dream is not qualified by the dream. If the sight of the dream were qualified by the dream, then the negation of the dream should amount to the negation of the sight. The sight of the dream is not qualified by the dream. The sight of the beginning of the dream is not qualified by the beginning. The sight of the end of the dream is not qualified by the end, in the sense the sight of the beginning has no beginning. The sight of the dream is free from the qualities of the dream. The sight of the end of the dream has no end. The sight of the beginning of the waking has no beginning. The sight of the end of the waking has no end. The sight of the end of both the state has no end. This very sight is truth. This very sight is truth. This sight has no, it doesn't depend upon any sadhanam. This sight is distorted. And that is also said. Apicha avidyadimataha. Apicha further. Avidyadimataha, a person who is ignorant. Avidyadimata. Sansarinaha. This ignorant person, this individual, who looks at himself, the sight as a form, is called the ignorant. This individual, this is a new label that I am a form. It is the sight seen as a form. Actually, all that is there is only a sight. There is no, and that sight has no dimension. Form has height. The sight has no height. Form has weight. Sight has no weight. Form has color and creed. So sight has no color. Form has beginning and end. Sight has no beginning and an end. When we say I, it implies only, it means only, it doesn't have to imply. It straight away means sight. The I does not mean the form, because the sight quits the form and still remains. You sleep and there is only, and the form goes, there is only sight of the dream. And the dream also goes, there is only sight. There is only sight, free from. It is not sight of something, there is only a sight, freedom free from either the waking or the dream. In this manner, this sight mistaken, this drishti mistaken for the form is called avidyavan, a sansari, a struggler. Apicha avidyadimataha sansarinaha shariradi apeksham jnanotpattihi sya. He thinks that jnanam depends upon sharira and the senses. Now here is a statement which says, a very important, here is a statement which says that God doesn't depend upon a means, God's sight does not depend upon a means, whereas this individual's sight depends upon sadhanam. It should mean In fact, sight does not depend upon the means, but the individual who is ignorant thinks that the sight depends upon the means. Why? Because we cannot even classify God's sight and man's sight. We can't classify sight because sight cannot be counted. Sight cannot be counted. You see, God, your sight, my sight. There can be your understanding is different from my understanding. That is different. Understanding is a different matter from the sight that is. Sight is what I am aware of the wake. That is sight. I am aware of the dream. That is sight. The sight of the three states is sight. That is common to all individuals anyway. The sight of the three states is common to all individuals. And that sight, the sight that is the nature of the self, cannot be classified. You can't say God's sight and Jiva's sight. Therefore, when Bhashyakara says God's sight does not depend upon the means, whereas man's sight depends upon the means like the body and the senses, quote unquote, should mean what? I hope you are able to follow a very subtle matter. It should be understood. God's sight means sight as such. Sight as such. Sight in fact does not depend upon any means, but in ignorance it is thought to depend upon the means. And the one who thinks that the sight depends upon the means, that particular thinking makes one Jiva, a sansari, a mortal. संसारिणः शरीराद्यपेक्षा ज्ञानोत्पत्तिः स्यात् न ज्ञान प्रतिबंध कारण रहितस्य ईश्वरस्य. But the sight of Ishvara doesn't have obstacles. The obstacles means Swarupa has no obstacles. The Swarupa, the sight as such, there is nothing that can come and hamper it. The sight as such cannot be hampered, but it can be thought to be hampered. You see, this is the problem. The ropeness of the rope cannot be hampered, but in my thinking, it can be hampered. I can think that it is hampered. Notional. There is no other way of really concealing a reality. If you say it is self-evident, the sight which is indeed aware of everything, how can that sight be eclipsed? The sight that is aware of everything, how can it be true? How can the illumined eclipse the illuminer? I mean, if you are very serious, how can the illumined eclipse the illuminer? How can the thought eclipse the thinker? How can the thought eclipse the subject? How can the drishyam eclipse the sight? Because there cannot be any pratibandhaka. There cannot be anything that can stifle it. The sight can't be stifled, eclipsed. That's not possible. Because that is the fundamental, that is the truth. Nahi drashtuhu drishter viparilopo vidyate. There is nothing that can stifle the sight. Then what is it really that stifles it for me to think really that it is gone? I say the sight is gone in Sushupti. So I call Sushupti, I swear by Sushupti, I swear by my own experience of Sushupti. I say it is my own experience, deep sleep state is my own experience. I say a state before life, the blackout before birth is my own experience. The blackout after death also is my own experience. It is not a belief. Nobody gets so scared of a blackout which is a matter of belief. Nobody gets scared. Nobody gets scared of a belief. If you know that it is a belief. Therefore, it is one's own experience. The blackout before birth is one's own experience. The blackout after the death is also one's own experience. One thinks the blackout later, blackout before, blackout in deep sleep. That blackout again is one's own experience, and one says at that time that during that blackout the sight is gone. Then what is it really that stifles that sight? What is it that stifles that sight? Bhagavan says that pratibandhaka is avidya. The stifler of the sight is avidya. There can't be any stifler. Nothing can stifle it. Nothing can eclipse it. But there can be avidya, means non-recognition of the fact is the stifler of the fact. Non-recognition of the fact, really, if I miss what is evident, that is what is called the avidya, that is the eclipse. That is the eclipse. Not registering it. That is why here he says, Jnana pratibandhaka anurahitasya ishvarasya. And ignorance is there only from the ignorance point of view. Ignorance is not there from the vastu point of view. It's very important. You see. The error is there only, the snake error is there only from the point of view of perception of it. That means snake is not there except as perception. Snake is there only as perception. That means snake is there only from the perception point of view. That means what snake exists from its own point of view, not from the root point of view. That means non-recognition of the fact is not an attribute of the fact. The non-recognition of the fact, non-recognition is there only as non-recognition of the fact. Non-recognition is not there as a part of the fact. Non-recognition of the fact is not a part of the fact, is not an ingredient part of the fact. Non-recognition of the fact is not an ingredient part of the fact. And from the fact point of view, there is no non-recognition as a part of it. If you search for non-recognition as an ingredient in the sight, then there is no. The moment you take the fact point of view, if you take the standpoint of the fact, then there is no non-recognition. And therefore there is no pratibandhaka in the vastu. If the ignorance, non-recognition, the so-called non-recognition of the fact, which is the eclipse, you see, if that is not a part of the fact, that means inside the fact, in the fact as a part of the sight, there is no pratibandhaka. Ignorance is not a part of the reality. Ignorance of the reality is not a part of the reality. Ignorance of the reality is not a part of the reality. My ignorance about my own sight is not a part of my sight. In fact, my own ignorance about the sight, my own non-understanding of my own sight does not really take away anything from the sight. The sight continues to be there as the unnegated, unnegatable, eternal sight, and along with that, the sight continues, plus there is non-understanding. Plus there can be non-understanding. That non-understanding does not disturb the sight. Just the sight. In this manner, in the case of the jiva, there is an obstacle, there is a pratibandhaka, there is an error because of which he thinks that the sight is conditional to the senses, conditional to the thought. But the sight as such, as a fact, is free from that avidya, and therefore it is not conditional to the sense in the thought. And put it in simplest language, sight in fact is independent of any sadhana, though it is thought of as conditional. And that the one who thinks that my sight depends upon the senses, etc., is called a jiva, he is called a sansari, he is called a struggler. That is how he looks that I am a mortal. On what basis can the sense of mortality can come? The sense that I am a mortal is there because he thinks my sight is subject to go. My sight is subject to go, therefore I am a mortal. When I lose my sight, I am gone. And the rest of the wrong kahanis, after death, the soul will go. That is what? Belief. Those beliefs are not more powerful than the conclusion that I am subject to come to an end. And therefore, those beliefs have nothing much to give. And therefore we study Shastram not to entertain one more belief, we study Shastram to correct that fundamental universal conclusion that this sight is subject to negation. And if that conclusion is corrected, the sense of mortality is also corrected. Thus, the Shastra is corrective of the fundamental conclusion and also all the beliefs that fall within that conclusion. It is not meant to bring about another belief. It is not meant another belief. Beliefs, I can entertain much better beliefs than all the scriptures. I mean, anyway it is a belief, why don't you have the best of beliefs? Why do you say it is only after killing somebody I have to go to heaven? Why entertain that belief? You can entertain a much better belief that really unconditionally after death I will go to heaven. That is much better. That is much better. Anyway, believe. एक आदमी ने एक ट्रेन में जाता था. They were together. They were traveling together, and he was going through Punjab, Ludhiana Express. One person said he saw the land in a beautiful land. It was a very, very green land, very fertile land. So he said, "I wish I had 10 acres of land." The other man said, "Anyway, you are imagining, why don't you be more generous? Why you are saying only 10 acres? Why don't you say that I wish I had the whole thing? Anyway, it is just a wishful thinking. Why do you have to be saying only after killing somebody I will go to heaven? Anyway, it is a belief. It is better to entertain a beautiful belief that we all meet in heaven. That belief is much better. And therefore, the Vedic scripture is something different. It is a Pramana Grantha. Mantrau cha imau Ishwarasya Shariradi Anapekshataam Anavarana Jnanatam Jadarshayataham. So here he says, just another few minutes. Here are two mantras. Mantrau cha imau. Here are the two mantras. Ishwarasya Shariradi Anapekshataam Anavarana Jnanatam Jadarshayataham. Here are the two mantras which highlight that God never loses the sight. And God's sight is independent of all senses in the mind. And there is nothing that can eclipse the sight. In fact, sight uneclipsable is called God. uneclipsable sight is called God. In one side there is a problem of thine and mine, not thy sight and my sight. Sight is. And here is the mantra I see. Natasya karyam karanam cha vidyate natat samascha bhyadikascha drishyate. He says, tasya karyam na vidu. The sight has no body as a part of it. Karanam, the sight has no thought as a part of it. Meaning the sight doesn't depend upon the body, the sight does not depend upon the mind. Natat samaha, and there is nothing equal to the sight. Na bhyadikascha drishyate, and there is nothing greater than the sight. There is nothing equal to the sight. There is nothing greater than the sight. In fact, there is nothing other than the sight. Because the sighted is not other than the sight. The sighted is a creation within the sight. You see, the sighted, where else can it be created? The sighted is created within the sight. If the sighted is created somewhere else, it would not be sighted. Dream is created within the sight, unsighted. It is born in sight and gets sighted. All that is sighted is created within the sight and gets sighted. Unfortunately, there is a sense of externality, there is a sense of division. So the sighted is other than me, the seer. The sighted, what I see is other than me, the seer. This sense of division all comes under avidya. Actually, the sighted is a seed within the sight. Therefore, there is nothing greater than the sight. There is nothing equal to the sight. There is nothing other than the sight. There is nothing other than the sight. Natat samascha bhyadikascha vidyate. Nothing equal to it, nothing greater than it. Parasya Shakti. Its Shakti, its nature, its capacity is not something conditional to something, it is para. Para means what? It is not apara, it is not empirical. The seeing capacity of the seer is not apara, is not empirical, is not mundane, is not ephemeral. Asya Shakti para. The seer's capacity to see is para Shakti. It is not temporal Shakti. Vividhaiva shruyate. And it is heard in various ways. Swabhaviki, it is natural. That is its swarupa. Jnana bala kriyacha. And it is that capacity of Parameshwara, the capacity of the seer, the seeing nature of the seer itself looks as the sight of the world, as the vitality of action, as action. Everything that is manifest, the whole manifestation is nothing but that one sight. Jnana kriya, bala kriya, both are really nothing but they are nothing but only the sight. So what we call vitality is also the sight. Thought is sight. Life as such is sight. Body is sight. Body is also sight. Senses are sight. Mind is sight. Action is sight. Emotions are sight. Pleasures are sight. Pain is sight. Bereft of sight, what is action? Action is action. Vitality. Why is it not sight? Is there not sight in it? The volition is sight. And willing and doing is also sight, because the entire vitality falls within the sight. The whole waking state is sight. Independent of sight, there is no action. Independent of sight, there is no result. Independent of sight, there is no creation. Therefore, drishti, the sight alone, is the truth of all that is sighted. If you say vitality is not sight but sighted, but the sighted is not other than the sight. The dreamt is not other than the dreamer. The dream is sighted and there is a sight. There is sight of the dream. The sighted, the dream is not other than the sight. And what are we? Sighted or sight? Sight. We are the sight. And it has no name, it has no form. Because name, form, everything come under sighted. And the sighted is sighted only within the sight. The sighted is sighted not outside the sight, the sighted is sighted within the sight. Thus Shankaracharya says, my dear Purvapakshi, don't say really God's sight depends on how can God see, how can the seer see before creation, independent of the body, because before the creation there is no body, there are no senses, there is no mind, therefore how could the seer see? I say the seeing nature of the seer does not depend upon the body and the thought. The seeing nature of the seer is independent of the body and the senses, and therefore the sight is eternal. The sight is eternal, nityam. And Vedanta only says that eternal seer saw. Saw what? The unmanifest names and forms. For what? To make them manifest. And seeing the unmanifest is called creation. When I see the unmanifest, then it becomes manifest. When I see the plant in the seed, then it has already become manifest. I saw the wave. I saw the unmanifest wave. It has already become manifest. I see the wave means becomes manifest. And therefore, seeing itself is creation. Seeing the form is creation. Seeing is the truth. Seeing the form is creation. That is why Shruti says, God saw and created. God saw. That's creation. So kamayata bahusyam prajayeti sadapodapyata sadapastaptva idagam sarvam asrajita. He saw, may I make the manifest unmanifest, and then everything became manifest. That means he saw the unmanifest and that became manifest. But anyway, that is unimportant. What is important is that seeing is eternal. And before creation, there is only the eternal seer. And therefore, whatever gets created later on is not outside that seer. Thus, Pradhanam is not Jagat Karanam. Coming back to the topic. Your Pradhanam is not Jagat Karanam. Why? Pradhanam is not a seer. Pradhanam is not a seer. God is the seer. Self is the seer. Purusha is the seer, not Pradhanam. Continue it later. Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnavachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om.